It was a stormy weeknight when I clocked in for my usual overnight shift as the loan manager at a small retail store. I was in my mid-20s back then, and though the job wasn't glamorous, I didn't mind it. There was a certain quiet satisfaction in being alone, organizing shelves, checking inventory, and making sure everything was in order for the next day. But on this particular night, the familiar solitude turned into something far darker. The rain was relentless as I arrived at the store, wind slapping against the building with a force that made the large glass windows shudder. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered slightly, as if the storm outside was trying to breach my small bubble of routine. I shrugged it off. Power outages and glitches were common during storms, and I had more pressing things to focus on, like filling shelves and completing the shipment logs. For the first couple of hours, everything was uneventful. The sound of rain pounding on the roof became a kind of white noise, almost comforting. I grabbed my cart, loaded it with merchandise, and started making my rounds through the aisles. The store was quiet except for the occasional creak of the old floor tiles beneath my sneakers. But just as I reached the middle of the store, a loud thud echoed from the back warehouse. I froze, my grip tightening on the cart handle. Probably just the wind knocking something over, I muttered to myself, trying to push down the unease that crept up my spine. Still, I decided to check it out. It was my responsibility, after all. The warehouse was a cold, cavernous space with towering shelves and dim lighting that flickered sporadically. The air smelled faintly of cardboard and cleaning supplies. As I stepped inside, the sound of the rain grew muffled, replaced by an eerie silence that felt oppressive. I scanned the room with my flashlight, but nothing seemed out of place. Boxes were stacked neatly, and the metal door to the loading bay was securely shut. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As I turned to leave, another sound stopped me in my tracks, the faint, deliberate creak of footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere deeper in the warehouse. My heart began to race. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing back to me. "Is someone there?" No answer. Only silence, thick and unnerving. I gripped my flashlight tighter and took a cautious step forward. The rows of shelves seemed to stretch endlessly, their shadows twisting and shifting under the flickering lights. At the far end of the aisle, I thought I saw movement, a fleeting shadow. There one moment and gone the next. "Hey, this is private property," I shouted, trying to inject some authority into my voice, though the tremor betrayed my fear. Still, no response. I debated calling the police, but part of me hesitated. What if it was just my imagination? Or a stray animal that had somehow gotten in? The last thing I wanted was to call in a false alarm and look like an idiot. Swallowing my nerves, I decided to investigate further. I crept down the aisle, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Each step felt heavier than the last, the sound of my own breathing unnaturally loud in the stillness. As I rounded the corner, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. A trail of wet footprints leading deeper into the warehouse. They were fresh, the water from the rain still glistening under the flashlight's beam. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice breaking slightly. The footprints were too large to belong to an animal. Someone had been in the store. No, someone was still here. The silence was deafening, save for the rhythmic drip of water coming from somewhere overhead. My mind raced with possibilities. A homeless person seeking shelter? A thief? Or something worse? I tried to steady my breathing as I followed the trail, each step amplifying my dread. The footprints led to the back corner of the warehouse, near a stack of old unused shelves. The shadows here seemed thicker, the air colder. My flashlight caught a glimpse of movement behind one of the shelves, and my heart nearly stopped. Slowly, I approached, every instinct screaming at me to turn and run, but I couldn't, not yet. "If you are here, you need to leave now," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound firm. "I am calling the police." For a moment, there was nothing, and then, from the shadows, a figure stepped into the dim light of my flashlight. It was a man, tall and gaunt, with wet clothes clinging to his thin frame. His face was partially obscured by the hood of his jacket, but what I could see was unsettling. His eyes were hollow, sunken, and he stared at me with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and raspy. "Neither should you," I shot back, taking a step backward. "Look, I don't want any trouble. Just leave and I won't call the cops." He didn't move. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if studying me. Then, without a word, he turned and walked deeper into the shadows, disappearing from view. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the flashlight. I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911, keeping my eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. The dispatcher's voice was a lifeline, grounding me as I explained the situation. They assured me officers were on their way, but it would take time given the storm and my store's remote location. I hung up and retreated to the office, locking the door behind me. From the security monitors, I could see parts of the warehouse, but the cameras didn't cover every angle. The man was nowhere in sight. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, every creak and groan of the building setting my nerves on edge. Just when I thought the nightmare couldn't get worse, the power went out. The monitors blinked off, plunging the office into darkness. I cursed under my breath, grabbing my flashlight and pointing it toward the door. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened for any sound, any indication of where the man might be. And then I heard it. The faint sound of footsteps just outside the office door. They stopped, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then, the doorknob rattled. "The police are on their way," I shouted, trying to mask the fear in my voice. "Leave now." The rattling stopped. I held my breath, straining to hear any movement, and then a single, deliberate knock echoed through the room. My blood ran cold. Whoever was out there wasn't just trying to get in, they were toying with me. I backed away from the door, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. The knocking continued, each strike more forceful than the last. Just when I thought the door would give way, the sound stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Moments later, the red and blue lights of police cars illuminated the front windows of the store. Relief washed over me as I unlocked the office door and ran to meet the officers. I explained what had happened, and they began a thorough search of the store and warehouse. But the man was gone, vanished as if he'd never been there. All they found were the wet footprints leading to the loading bay door, which had been left ajar. The police theorized that he was likely a drifter seeking shelter from the storm, but I wasn't convinced. There was something about the way he'd looked at me, the way he'd spoken, that felt wrong, dangerous. I couldn't shake the feeling that his intentions had been far from innocent. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop replaying the events of that night in my mind. Every shadow, every unexpected sound made me jump. I started double-checking the locks on every door and window, even during the day. Eventually, I left that job, unable to face another night alone in that store. To this day, I don't know who he was or what he wanted. But sometimes, late at night, I think about the knock on the door, the way it echoed through the office. And I wonder, what would have happened if the police hadn't arrived in time?